All right, guys, so getting started, wire tuck. Some of you might be thinking, for what? A lot of these old trucks don't really have a lot of wiring to begin with, but I definitely want this truck to be different. I want it to stand out a little bit at shows, but for the most part, when you look at it, it's gonna look stock. And then you'll start to notice little things here or there that are definitely custom. So most of the wiring is here on the passenger side. I'm not going to relocate the battery, although I did think about that, but I don't mind leaving it here. We're just going to relocate all this, the voltage regulator, and then I'll eventually clean up some of this wiring here. We'll get it into one loom and just run it underneath the air cleaner and through the back there. And then on the driver's side, you don't really have much. Just this little strand here, which I'm going to try to hide up in this. But for starters, I already removed the passenger side fender. And what I have so far are these Painless junction terminals. So I'm able to place these somewhere so I don't have to drill a hole and then run a cable through. Put these on the truck somewhere, and where I'm thinking now is if I run the positive from the battery up through here, run it in through here, and then through this fresh air vent. If you guys saw the Fat Fender Garage fan box delete video, I did make this little plate here as a block off. So it goes just like this on the inside. So I'm thinking I'm gonna run the terminals here. The power, I'm not sure about the negative yet, but I'm definitely gonna run them probably kind of tucked up like this. I'll make some little bracket that will kind of protect them from coming into contact with anything, but I'm gonna start with the power, and we'll get all these things like the voltage regulator, the starter solenoid loose, and I'll take a look as far as how I can shove the wiring back through. I think that main loom right there, I might have to cut that grommet and kind of shove those wires back in. So I've got the truck back in the garage. It was getting dark and quite cold, so now we're working from inside the garage. But one question you guys might have for me is, why would you take it this far for a wire tuck? And two reasons, guys. So obviously I removed the whole dash. So I did that for accessibility. Just being able to access this whole passenger side of the cab is gonna make this a lot easier. I'm still not quite sure where I'm gonna place everything, but I do have an idea of what I need to do. So this section of harness here runs out into the engine bay, and that's what goes all the way over to the right and runs up to the voltage regulator, the starter solenoid, the alternator. So everything on this side of the truck needs to come back in. So I'm gonna pull that back through. I'm not quite sure what I need to lengthen, if I need to lengthen anything or shorten up any wires, but once I get the starter solenoid, which is the main thing, kind of in the right location, I can figure out what I'm gonna do with the wiring and where I'm gonna route it. There is one smaller section of the loom that needs to come in right over here in this area. So I'll probably run that back in as well. I'll show you guys when I get there. So that was reason number one, is accessibility. Reason number two, I do eventually plan on replacing the floor in this truck. You guys have seen some of the damage over here on this side. The firewall seam is all bent up. Some pretty bad rust. On this side, I could just replace the floor pan, but because this side of the floor is pushed up here, I'm just gonna replace the whole thing. And we have some pretty bad rust there. So doing this lets me get a view of where everything's at, the wiring. When I do get to replacing the floor and the firewall, I'll kind of have an idea of where I need to move this, what I can take off, and if I clean it up now, I should be able to, for the most part, remove it completely and then put it back on. I did remove some of the wiring already. This was just some extra from the factory. This truck was an AC truck. The AC system was missing, but the fan box was old, was leaking everywhere. That's probably where all this rust came from. So obviously we removed it. If you guys want to check that video out, this is a fan box delete panel from Fat Fender Garage. If you guys are looking to get rid of your stock fan box, this panel is very, very nice and makes it very, very simple. So I did remove some of this, and that was from this general area, so that kind of cleaned that up, but it's going to make this a lot easier. And eventually I do plan on going with an aftermarket AC system, so hopefully won't interfere with anything, but we'll pick this back up tomorrow. Got a little bit of rain early this morning, so I apologize if the audio is not super clear, but what I need to do next is start labeling all the wiring. That way I know what goes where, don't get anything mixed up. This section of harness here is the other piece that I'm going to be running back through the firewall. It's just this standalone piece here. That main loom that I showed you guys is all of this. And then that also goes up to the headlight here. So the headlight we can just unplug and set that aside. We'll tape that back up later. But for now, we're gonna just start with labeling everything and we'll pull it back through the firewall. So you guys can see how much cleaner this is going to look. Like I mentioned, I am going to leave the battery and the battery tray up front here. I did leave this section of harness on for now just so I don't get everything mixed up, but more than likely I'm probably going to have to extend some of these. I'll probably run this down along the frame and out and in that way. These are the other two main harnesses. So this one we're going to push through. Same thing with the small one here. We'll get those all pushed through. We'll start to organize these two and separate everything. Once I get that done, we'll tackle this one, and that way I can run everything together and start to make new looms. I did buy some new electrical tape from American Auto Wire. It's kind of like that felt tape. So we're gonna be using that to wrap everything back up. Still getting a little bit of rain on and off as the morning progresses, but now that I've got both sections of the original harness pulled back through the firewall and in the cab, the next step is going to be to separate them and start to create kind of individual looms based off of where I'm going to place everything and in what direction I'm going to be routing some of the wiring. So the first one I want to figure out is the one up to the headlight. So we'll start by separating that one. I will more than likely need to extend that, but for now, we'll work on that. We'll start to get this all pulled apart. I'll probably tape them off individually based off of what needs to go where, so that once we test that everything works before I wrap everything back up, I don't want to wrap everything and then find out that I made a connection error or didn't connect something correctly. So we'll start by separating the headlight, and I'll catch you guys back up when I've made some progress. Day 3 of working on the wire tuck, and I'm very, very happy with how everything's coming together. I was able to get a lot done yesterday, but by the time I finished, it was dark. So I just wanted to give you guys some better lighting. You can also say I have a slight case of OCD with certain things, but it's looking very, very clean and I'm very happy with it. So the driver's side wiring is all tucked underneath the fender. I still need to kind of secure it up away from the tire. I ended up redoing some of the electrical connections with some heat shrink. This is obviously to the coil, oil pressure. The temperature sensor is right behind the distributor here and the power for the electric choke. But wrap these up like this and ran it all the way back to the firewall, reused that original grommet. And then as we make our way over here to the passenger side, I'm very, very happy with how this looks. It's super clean. Battery tray is back in. I routed most everything through this factory hole there. And then I decided to leave the voltage regulator here up against the core support. It's kind of hidden already. So just extended these wires here, redid a bunch of the connections to the back of the alternator because they were really, really bad. Got all the wiring connected here. The last thing I need to do is extend this one. So I'm going to show you guys how I do this. I believe I've gone over it in a few videos, what type of connectors I use, but I'm going to extend it so we can run it into the cab and get it to the starter solenoid. So as far as extending wires or fixing electrical connections, it's actually quite simple. What you do, obviously, is you cut off the damaged end or where you want to extend it. You'll just take some cutters and strip away what you don't need. So you just expose the wire, and then what I do is I actually found this on a YouTube video that goes over how to solder electrical connections. Now we're not quite going to be using soldering on this, but what we're going to be using, it does have some solder in it. There are some connections that, like I said, I've showed you guys before. I just need to get these all spread out, and it's like a heat shrink type of tubing that has some solder in the middle, so when you heat everything up and it gets a good solid connection, that solder will melt and combine these wires together. So I spread these out, kind of interlocking them. Then you'll just kind of push them flat, and once they're flat, I just start to twist them on each other. Gives you a nice solid connection. Just wrap it as best as you can. And if you guys are hearing that, my daughter, my 2-year-old daughter, is in the cab. She loves playing in the truck. So she's playing in the truck while I fix the wiring. So these are the type of connectors that I use. And you can see the solder there in the middle. So we just slide that over there, and we'll use the heat gun. So with that last piece of wire extended and ran into the cab, I just used some zip ties to loosely hold everything together. These clips holding everything up and away from the tire, I ordered off of Amazon. They're stainless steel, and they have rubber to protect the edges and anything that passes through them. I am still thinking about using one more just to kind of tuck this up away. I'll use that whole location, but I'm very happy with how everything's turned out. Nice and clean. And then the last thing that we'll need to do is the positive and negative to the battery. I ordered new cables from Painless Wiring as well. They were 8 feet long. So I made a new negative ground to the engine. The old one kind of just ran up top here, so it wasn't very clean. I made this one long enough to tuck under the alternator. And I'm also going to secure it like this to the inner fender. And the positive is right here, just because we need to run this into the cab. So we'll run this into the cab using the 2 posts there. And then I made a new one for the starter. So this will also run through. I'll secure them on the inside here. And then once they're secure, I'll be able to pull them back out. And they should be just the right length so that it's not hanging too far down. And then we will move on to the interior. So the last step in this process is going to be finding a mounting location for the starter solenoid. If you guys can see, I already pre-drilled some holes up here. It's a nice flat surface, so I think that's the best spot for it. It's going to keep it high and out of the way, so you shouldn't be able to see any of the wires. We're going to get those nice and tucked up once we get everything hooked up. But for starters, we're going to mount the starter solenoid. We'll get all the wires hooked up, and then I'm going to explain the situation and how the terminals are going to work. So the way that I decided to do the terminals here on the kick panel is red is positive and goes directly to the battery. The black goes directly to the starter. So the way the starter solenoid works is on the left you'll have power from the battery, on the right would go to the starter. When you turn the key, power will pass through, turn the starter, and crank the engine over and start the truck. So for starters, we're going to get on the cable that goes to the black, which will send power to the starter. And all the rest of the connections pretty much go on the left side where you get power. So we'll just loosely tighten that up. We'll get the wire hooked up here. And I'm going to be making a new cable for the power from the Painless wiring kit. I still have a small piece left over, so I'll be using that. So real quick, I just want to show you guys how simple it is to use this kit from Painless Wiring. That way you're able to cut down any length power cord that you need. I've already got one end completed here. This is literally everything that you need. So we'll start off by just making a small cut here, and then we'll cut around. You're not trying to cut too deep. You just want it deep enough to where you're able to pull off the outer sleeve and get to all the wiring. Very simple. So then I just twist these ends up, get them to sit nice and close. Just the right length. So we'll get that on there. So with my vice grips, I just got it crimped down, and that's a nice solid connection there. Probably tighten it just a little bit more. Now that should be good. The kit also provides quite a few of these heat shrink wraps. This one actually has some sort of like glue on the inside, it seems like. So you'll just slide that over, and we'll just use the heat gun. Besides just having to reinstall the dash, the wire tuck is complete. Everything is hooked up. The positive is connected to the battery and no issues so far. I zip tied most of the cables together here just so it's kind of one piece. And then I did also use a clip to secure it to the firewall, so it shouldn't be dropping down or moving around. But very happy with how it looks in the cab. The Painless wiring battery cable kit makes it very, very simple to create your own custom length positive or negative cables. My favorite part about the kit probably was the heat shrink. So you crimp the end on, get the heat shrink on, and it almost has like a glue on the inside of it. So it kind of bonds the two things together, makes it a really, really solid connection. Shouldn't have any issues with that. Same thing with the negative cables. But lastly, I just need to get the dash back on. I did clean up some of the wiring over on the driver's side, especially the temperature gauge. I just kind of shortened those up a little bit. But let's get the dash back in, make sure everything works. Quick look at what's coming up on the channel. I still need to get together a few more parts before I can get started. But I'm going to be doing a 4-speed swap in the dually. Of course, that is the main piece right there. But as you guys can tell, the dash is back in the truck, so the wire tuck is complete. If you guys are new to the channel, I hope I've earned your subscription up to this point rather than ask at the beginning of the video. I hope you've enjoyed the video so far, and you please consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. So while I had the dash out, I actually ended up cleaning up the back part of it, and I also installed some sound deadening along the bottom just to kind of hopefully in the future quiet the interior noise down just a little bit. But looking across there, you can kind of see that terminal. So as you're sitting down, you're really not going to be able to see it. So it's pretty well hidden. But of course, the main reason for the wire tuck is how clean this engine bay looks. So I'm very happy with how everything turned out. A nice clean look.